One of the most common objections to the truth of Christianity is that the disciples just made up this whole story about Jesus. All of this is just a fabricated lie for some type of personal gain for these men. But let's take a deep look at the evidence and find out if this objection is reasonable. It's been said by many skeptics that we can't trust the testimony of the apostles because they were Christians, and therefore they were biased. But please consider that if you were there to witness the resurrection of Jesus, you would most assuredly become a believer as well. If you were there to witness a murder and were able to identify the murderer as an old coworker of yours by the name of John Smith, you would be a believer that John Smith was the murderer. Some might even call you a John Smithian. It would be foolish for someone to say to you that we can't trust your testimony because you were there to witness the murder, and now you're a John Smithian. So we can't just throw out the apostles' testimony just because they were Christians. But do we have any non-Christian sources confirming the apostles' accounts of Jesus' life? Yes, we do. We have many. The earliest non-Christian source that we have about Jesus is from a Jewish historian by the name of Flavius Josephus. He lived from AD 37 to 100. He said this about the life of Jesus. Now there was about this time Jesus a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as receive the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him many of the Jews and of the Gentiles. He was the Christ. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men amongst us, had condemned him to the cross, those who loved him first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive the third day, as the divine prophets had foretold, these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him. And the tribe of Christians so named for him are not extinct to this day. The following historical facts can be derived from this account. 1. Jesus of Nazareth existed. 2. Some people believed him to be the Messiah. 3. He had many disciples from both Jews and non-Jews. 4. He was condemned to death by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. 5. His disciples testified that Jesus rose from the dead 3 days after his death. 6. His disciples proclaimed the resurrection of Jesus. The historian Thallus in AD 52 mentioned that the sun disappeared at Jesus' crucifixion as the apostles proclaimed. The letter of Mara bar Serapion, who lived in the mid-1st century AD 73, mentions Jesus as the wise king of the Jews who was executed, who lived on in the teaching of his disciples. The Roman historian Cornelius Tacitus mentions Jesus in his writings, as he says this of Emperor Nero. He falsely charged with guilt and punished with the most exquisite tortures the persons commonly called Christians, who were hated for their enormities. Christus, the founder of the name, was put to death by Pontius Pilate, procurator of Judea, in the reign of Tiberius. Not only through Judea, where the mischief had originated, but through the city of Rome also. Tacitus' writings confirm the existence of Jesus as well as the spread of Christianity at an early date. Several other details that he mentions line up with the New Testament accounts. 1. Christ's public ministry began during the reign of Tiberius Caesar. 2. Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea at the time of Christ's death. 3. Jesus was put to death as a criminal. 4. His death occurred in Judea. These are just a few of the many ancient accounts we have of the life of Jesus that confirm the truthfulness of the life of Jesus from the apostles. Even Bart Ehrman, one of the most well-known New Testament critical scholars who is not a Christian, says this: despite the enormous range of opinion, there are several points on which virtually all scholars of antiquity agree. Jesus was a Jewish man, known to be a preacher and teacher, who was crucified, a Roman form of execution, in Jerusalem during the reign of Roman Emperor Tiberius, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea. Virtually all scholars of antiquity agree, Christian and non-Christian, on these facts. The apostles also included embarrassing details about themselves in their accounts of Jesus' life. In these accounts, we find that they argued amongst themselves about which of them was the greatest. They fell asleep on the night that Jesus was arrested, even after Jesus asked them to stay awake and pray. Peter denies that he knows Jesus 3 times after Jesus was arrested, trying to save himself from also being arrested. Thomas refuses to believe in the resurrection even after the disciples tell him that they saw Jesus alive. He says, "Unless I see the holes in his hands and the wound in his side, I will never believe." The disciples are constantly looking foolish in these accounts, showing their arrogance and lack of faith. Jesus is continually correcting them for their errors. Also, in every account from the apostles, women are the first to discover that Jesus is risen from the dead. Women were not even allowed to testify in court at that time in history. They were viewed as second-class citizens. Even more, one of the women, Mary Magdalene, was an ex-prostitute. So why? If the disciples just came together to fabricate a conspiracy about the life of Jesus and his resurrection, why would they include such embarrassing details about themselves? If this is all just a deceptive lie, why not fabricate a story where they are the heroes alongside Jesus? And why would they choose a woman who was an ex-prostitute as the primary witness to the empty tomb and the resurrection of Christ? Even if the story was true, they very easily could have airbrushed these details out, but they didn't. And the most reasonable explanation is that this is how it actually happened, so they stuck to their guns. And finally, what did the disciples have to gain if they fabricated this lie that Jesus rose from the dead? There are only three main reasons why someone would commit a lie of this magnitude: financial gain, sexual pleasure, or the pursuit of power. These men left everything, including their families and their homes, to follow Jesus, to proclaim his truth. They were poor and down and out. They had no hope of any sexual pleasure. Instead, they were often beaten and abused. Nor did they have any hope of power. They gave up their lives to serve people and proclaim this message of forgiveness and eternal life. Really, what did they hope to gain? Their leader, Jesus, was just brutally executed. Proclaiming his message would only attract the same opposition from the Jewish leaders and Romans. And this is exactly what happened. All of Jesus' disciples gave up their lives and were killed for proclaiming that Jesus was risen from the dead. Only John survived to old age as he was banished to the island of Patmos. Nathanael was flayed to death with a whip in Armenia. James the Just was thrown from the temple and then beaten to death in Jerusalem. James the Greater was beheaded in Jerusalem. Matthew was killed by the sword in Ethiopia. Matthias was stoned and then beheaded in Jerusalem. Philip was crucified in Phrygia. Thomas was stabbed to death with a spear as he preached the gospel in India. Peter was crucified upside down in Rome. He requested this because he didn't believe he was worthy to die the same death as Jesus. Andrew was crucified in Patras, Greece. He asked to be crucified on an X-shaped cross because he also felt unworthy to die the same death as Jesus. For 2 days on that cross, Andrew continued to proclaim the resurrection of Christ until he finally died. Many people in history were martyred for their faith, dying for what they believed to be true. But the death of these men is far different. If the resurrection of Christ was just a fabricated story, these men would have willingly gone to their brutal death for something they knew to be a lie. Who would be willing to die for a lie? The answer is nobody. Nobody would willingly die for something they knew to be untrue. When a group of men are arrested and questioned by the police concerning a lie, almost always one of them will crack under the fear of prison time, but not one of Jesus' disciples changed their testimony, even under the fear of brutal death. They held to their proclamation that Jesus rose from the dead, even as the whips were on their backs and nails were being driven through their hands and feet. The only reasonable and logical explanation that these men gave up their lives for the gospel of Christ is that Jesus actually rose from the dead. The only reason that we have these accounts of Jesus' life and that Christianity spread so quickly after Jesus' death is because many people saw him alive. The Apostle Paul said that at one time he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers. Despite all of this evidence, many people will continue to deny that Jesus could rise from the dead. They believe there must be some type of other alternative for the rise of Christianity. The challenge for those with that stance is this: if you want to make bodily death the cornerstone of your worldview, believing that no one could ever come back from the dead, that is your choice. But I would challenge you to strongly consider this wealth of evidence that we have, that Jesus is just who he claimed to be, and that he rose from the dead on the third day, just as he predicted. And the eternal life that he offers you is as real as the air we breathe and the ground we stand on.